Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later, we're going to take a look at some poll numbers, who's going to win in Colorado. But first, a guy who has been right about fast tracks when everyone said he was crazy. And then he predicted self-driving cars and everyone said he was crazy. Now he's going to talk to us about urban growth boundaries and some other issues. But what's truly crazy is this tie. Randal O'Toole from the Independence Institute and Cato, good to have you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, what's the deal with the tie? As long as I've known you, that's the tie.
Well, they say that a tie is the only article of clothing that a man wears solely to impress other men. And the only thing I want to impress on other men is I'm not like them. I'm an iconoclast. This tie does it. Done.
And also, I'd like the extra crispy next time. All right. I want to talk RTD just real fast. You did the seminal work on fast tracks. Everything you predicted has come true. It was over budget, it was underfunded, the model is awful. And the latest burp in it all has been the A train, the train to the airport, which has had some problems. Ridership is down, power outages have happened, which, I mean, they'll fix. But you predicted not only would it not be a good system, you also predicted, sadly, a lot of the deaths that have happened, not in rail, but around rail.
Well, that's a problem with light rail. It's going to be a little bit of a less of a problem with the A train because it has more separated right of way. But the problem with light rail is that you run it in the streets and you run it down one-way streets going the wrong direction. You're going to hit pedestrians, and light rail is 3 times more deadly than buses on city streets. And it's far more deadly than cars as well. But the A train doesn't quite have that problem. The A train's problem is just that they spent a heck of a lot of money on something that was already being provided privately through agencies like Super Shuttle, and they're not really doing anybody any favors. They're running trains that are slow, and they didn't even finish the project. I wrote it yesterday, and I was surprised. We got to a station and they said, okay, we're going to have to sit here for a while because we didn't have enough money to double track the next part of the line, so we have to wait for a train to come the other way. They spent 2.5 times as much money as they said it was going to cost, and they didn't have enough money to finish the project. So of course they're going to come back in a few years and say, oh, we have to finish it now, raise your taxes again.
There was one part of this that I've got to give RTD credit for. One of the nice things of living in Boulder, and there's only a few nice things about living in Boulder, is what's happened on US 36. We took what was arguably the best bus route in the country and we improved it with bus lanes. And bus lanes allow not just for buses, but for carpools and jitneys and school buses and Uber and Lyft and taxis and everybody who wants to get out of traffic, and guys like me who want to pay for the service. I'm assuming they did it right. In my mind, they did it right on US 36. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and bus rapid transit is really the way to go. The really interesting thing is that buses have a much higher capacity to move people than rail. Rails cost a lot of money. They cost a lot to maintain. We know the Washington metro system is breaking down almost daily because they haven't got enough money to maintain it. Buses are so cheap, and the reason why 800 American cities that had rails in 1910 converted to buses by 1970 is because they just make a lot more sense. They're flexible, they're resilient. If one bus breaks down, you don't have to shut down the whole system. And the capacity for moving people is so great. I was recently in Istanbul, and I saw a bus rapid transit system with lanes. It was 30 miles long, and they move 800,000 people a day. I think that's about more than twice. Almost 4 times what all of RTD moves on a per daily basis.
On one bus line.
On one 30-mile bus line. They run a bus every 14 seconds at rush hour.
Stop there. Every 14 seconds.
Every 14
that's
seconds
the beauty
a bus is going by.
buses, is you can launch them like this.
Right.
The other part that's beautiful is living in Boulder, I can catch the bus, the same bus that goes on the busway and shoots me down to Denver. So I don't have to make a transfer. I don't have to go on a bus to park and ride, then take another bus to a shuttle that takes me to a train. I get on the same bus, it gets out of Boulder, and it flies. And it can be an express. It doesn't have to stop at every stop. It has much more flexibility. So RTD did it right there. Why do I have a feeling that as soon as the bonds for fast tracks are over, we're going to see them ripping up the tracks again, and the next generation will have the same argument. Let's replace these tracks with something that's for the next technology. There's one technology that's going to help Uber and driverless cars in Denver, and that's on US 36. It's not anyplace else because the rest is rail.
Well, that's right, but the argument is going to be that the few people who are still riding the rails are going to want to keep them 30 years from now, and they're going to insist on keeping them. But tearing them out doesn't, as you say, doesn't provide room for cars, and yet there isn't going to be that many people riding them. 30 years from now, when you can pull out your smartphone, pull up an app, right now there's at least 3 different companies, Uber, Lyft, and other companies that are planning to flood our cities with self-driving taxis, and you can pull out your app. The car will be at your door. You get in. It takes you on the least congested route, the fastest route, drops you off at the door you want to go to, and it probably will do it at a price competitive with anything that RTD can offer that's heavily subsidized.
Incredible. All right, let's switch topics. As I said, I live in Boulder, which has its pluses and minuses, but I'm looking to buy a house. I've got a house. I want to buy a house to live in. It is ridiculously expensive. Why?
Because of the Boulder Greenbelt, and also the other part of the Danish plan, the plan conceived by Paul Danish years ago, which was to limit the number of building permits each year. Because of this, the Boulder's population only grew by 2% between 2000 and 2010. But the Boulder Greenbelt consists of 8 times as much land as the entire city of Boulder.
8 times?
8 times as much land. And that means nobody can build on that land. The city or county either owns the land or they own conservation easements on the land. So if you work in Boulder, you either have to live in Boulder or you have to commute from way outside of Boulder because there's no place to build. And that's just made housing very expensive. I'm sure Boulder is a pleasant place to live if you can afford to live there. The pleasant part is not so much the Boulder Greenbelt, but you're right up against the Arapahoe National Forest, or excuse me, the Roosevelt National Forest, which is up against the Arapahoe, which is up against Rocky Mountain National Park.
We've got the beautiful flowers. We've got the beautiful Flatirons. We've got the university. We've got all sorts of stuff. But there are other cities that also have growth restrictions that don't have green belts around them. They have urban growth boundaries, right?
Well, Denver has an urban growth boundary, and that's made housing expensive here.
What is an urban growth boundary?
An urban growth boundary is a line outside of which you can't build a development and expect to be able to hook it up to sewer and water and things like that. You might be able, depending on the zoning, to build one house and put in a septic tank and get a well. But you can't get urban services outside of the urban growth boundary. This is all part of smart growth
that says, listen, we don't want sprawl. We don't want to look like L.A. We want to keep a lot of open space so you can't build outside of the city center. Here it is, build inside. And over time, it means you're going to build up, but we're going to preserve the character.
Well, L.A. is a bad example because L.A. has urban growth boundaries. It's the densest urban area in the United States. The Denver urban area has about 3,500 people per square mile. LA is twice that dense. It's 7,000 people per square mile. What I recently read in Politico is that Denver doesn't want to be like Houston, which has 3,000 people per square mile. But more important, Houston has affordable housing. They have no zoning. There's no zoning in the county lands around Houston. The housing is very affordable. Caldwell Banker says you can buy a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,200 square foot house for $237,000. Because of the urban growth boundary, that same house in Denver is $545,000, more than twice as much. Because of the Greenbelt, that same house in Boulder is $1.1 million, 4 times as much as a house in Houston.
So is this just a question of keeping the character of a community that we like versus affordable housing? Is this the choice? If we want to have affordable housing, well, now we have to look like Houston, which people rag on all the time, but there's all sorts of wild, wonderful neighborhoods there. Or we're going to have huge Boulder-like cost of living and housing prices, but we'll keep a nice little place to live.
I think there's a hidden agenda here, and that's first of all, enriching the people who live here, and second of all, keeping the riffraff out. One example, as I said, Boulder's population grew by 2% between 2000 and 2010. Boulder's black population shrank by 22%.
In the same 10-year period.
Yeah, in the same 10-year period. So low-income people are being forced out, which means the people who are living there can all shop at Whole Foods and feel good about themselves because they're buying local and buying organic and so on and so forth. But the people who can't afford to do that if they work there, they're having to commute long distances, and then the local people can sneer at them for driving their cars.
But this is our community. You're saying it's racist? You think it's racistly?
Boulder is the most racist city in Colorado. Nationwide, the most racist city is San Francisco, which has even more dire numbers than Boulder.
But we also do things like permanently affordable homes. We have all sorts of assistance programs in Boulder to help those poor people, often minority people, get a place to live.
How often are they minority people, first of all? My experience is that most of the people getting these affordable homes are people who are just out of college, who expect to earn a lot of money, but they haven't earned money in the past few years, so they find themselves eligible for getting one of these homes. Also, if you buy a home in Boulder and the price goes up, you can sell it and make that money. You buy one of these affordable homes in Boulder and the price goes up, too bad. You're not allowed to sell it.
People don't realize that. This is probably one of the most evil, and I do mean evil, things that the growth control crowd does. When they put out something called permanently affordable homes in places like Boulder, you take somebody who was a renter and you give them the illusion that they just bought a house. But in order to buy the house, they have to agree they can't sell it as an appreciated property. So my home that I own is obviously my best investment. Thank you for the growth control, because of the property value, my house has gone wild. The guy next to me has to sell it for the same price basically he paid for it plus inflation. He sees no ownership. He's not an owner. He's a renter that's been duped into ownership.
Yeah, it's a feudalistic system is really what it comes down to. We'll give you permission to live there. You pay us a bunch of money, and then that's it. We can kick you out anytime we'd like.
Tell me a little bit about your plans on urban growth boundaries. You have a question about the legality of them.
This is a problem we've been having for years. California started establishing urban growth boundaries in the 70s, Hawaii in the 60s, Oregon in the 70s and 80s, and we've fought them. Property rights advocates have fought them, and we haven't gotten anywhere. Whereas some cities we've been able to convince not to build light rail, at least. The transportation, we've been a little more successful. But last year, the Supreme Court came up with a decision that I think will require the removal of all urban growth boundaries and some major changes to the green belt in Boulder. And this decision said that the Fair Housing Act makes it illegal for you to rent your house to somebody to say you refuse to rent your house to somebody because they're a minority. You can't refuse to rent or sell a house to somebody because they're a minority. But what the Supreme Court said last year is that if you have a government policy that makes housing more expensive and that harms low-income minorities such as blacks or Latinos, then that is also potentially a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And you better have some really good reasons for that. And if those reasons can't justify the policy, then that policy has to be thrown out. And I look at the reasons for the Boulder Greenbelt, I look at the reasons for the Dr. Cog's urban growth boundary, and I can't see that they're justifying doubling or quadrupling housing prices and forcing people to live in either lower quality housing or to move out of the community.
Let me see if I'm understanding this, because this is pretty earth-shattering. The Fair Housing Act, it basically says you landlord, have to rent properties to whomever is available. You can't look at the race. You can't look at all sorts of factors. But when the government does a policy that basically does the exact same thing as they have in Boulder, saying, I'm sorry, poor people, you can't afford it, that could well be a violation of the Fair Housing Act, and therefore all these urban growth boundaries around the country could be no more if the Supreme Court agrees with you.
A lot of people disagreed with that ruling. A lot of people thought that you shouldn't lump people together and say, if you're hurting people because blacks tend to be low income or Latinos tend to be low income, that's a violation of the law. But I look at it and I say, a lot of these policies are passed with hidden agendas. And there's no overt racism there, and yet there's covert racism. you know, we don't want those people in our communities. And we might not even be thinking of blacks or Latinos. We just don't want people who don't think like us in our communities.
That is Boulder. I believe Boulder is the most intolerant of all Colorado cities. And I think we're pretty tolerant people. And there's all sorts of different shades of liberal. But if you're not a new urbanist, CU environmentally sound person, you're not welcome there. It's awful. And now if you don't have the money to live there, you can't live there either. Hey, I got to run. Thank you so much. We'll see you in court. Stay tuned.